My name is Mike Brown, pronouns he, him, and I'm the Community Engagement Manager for Hilltop Educator Institute, the professional development and community outreach arm of Hilltop Children's Center, a Reggio-inspired preschool on the traditional lands of the Duwamish tribe, the first people of what is now known by colonizers as Seattle, Washington. As a professional development institute focused on anti-racism, equity, and social justice, we have to constantly examine ourselves, our programs, and actively eliminate barriers to learning so we can all benefit from the knowledge and rich experiences of others. Over the course of the years, we've listened, we've reflected, and now we're responding to the calls of our friends in Tennessee, Indiana, DC, New Mexico, Canada, and more to make our offerings more accessible. So, welcome to our newest segment called Community Voices. Now, despite being short in minutes, these segments pack a powerful punch. They're rich in knowledge from leaders within the field, and best of all, they're free. So grab a pen, share with a friend, and as Hilltop Core Values says, let's learn in relationship with each other. So thank you, Amelia. Thank you for joining us today. We're super excited that, I know you have all the time in the world nowadays because we're in but I really do appreciate you carving out some time to talk to us, as well as just the community out there that's listening. So, my name is Mike Brown. He, him are my pronouns. I'm the community engagement manager at Hilltop Children's Center in Seattle, Washington. Um, Please introduce yourselves and let us know occupation, pronouns, and just anything that you'd like to share with us.
Okay, great. Yeah, it's really my pleasure to be here today having this conversation with you. I'm so thankful for this technology that's allowing us to continue to having all of these great conversations. But yeah, my name is Emilio Baclita. I use she, her pronouns. I am the N Outreach and Education Specialist at the Institute for Learning and Brain Sciences, which is a research institute at the University of Washington. So I'm part of a team of outreach specialists. We basically do science communication, and the Institute for Learning and Brain Sciences is an interdisciplinary research institute that studies early childhood learning, brain development, and we're expanding to think more broadly about human learning. So we love to think about how do people learn, what's going on in their brains, and then my job is to talk with people and share that information, have conversations about it.
Perfect. So you're a professional talker like me. I love it.
Yeah, it's great. It's a fun job.
Oh, this interview is going to be perfect. So I want to just jump straight into it. We're clearly in a pandemic. We're living
Yep.
in COVID. And I know that just the first 2,000 days of life in a child's life are really the most expansive and critical parts and periods just of their brain development.
Yeah.
So thinking about the atmosphere that we're living in right now, what might be happening differently right now for children who are spending dozens and maybe months on months in kind of this unusual circumstance?
Yeah. So I think the first thing that is really important, and I'll say too, my it's always nice to know what people's backgrounds are. My background is neuroscience, and then now I work in sort of talking about early education. But I love the brain, so I spend a lot of time thinking about the brain. And I think my headline message there is like, it's going to be okay. Children are learning so much all the time. You mentioned this is an amazing period for brain development. So, every moment of every day, children are learning, forming new physical brain connections. There's that estimate that, people are probably familiar with, that every second between the ages of, 0 and 3, children are forming something like 1 million new neuronal connections in their brain, which is really incredible. That's like new physical connections in their brains, which is really remarkable. And we have this amazing brain that is flexible and adaptive and allows us, I like to say it allows us to survive and hopefully thrive in any environment that we're going to be. So children are learning and adapting all the time. And so children are going to and are adapting to this situation that's different, and they will adapt and change as we come out of it too. I think that's another thing to think about it too, right? We're in this pandemic right now, but then we're going to have to sort of figure out how we reintegrate into our sort of regular everyday goings on, and what does that look like, and how is that going to change? I think for me, the thing that I think most about in this time is those social interactions, right? That's the biggest thing for all of us, regardless of, if we're a young child or if we're adult, we're all sort of missing our friends, missing those interpersonal connections that we have, right? So I think, and we learn in community, we learn together, and children, as you know, as we all know, they have really active social lives that we as adults don't even know about, right? And they're missing their friends. They're missing this whole world that they don't have access to right now. And so as adults, I think we can really help children continue to build relationships and stay connected in all of the different ways that we can do that. And there's a bunch of different ways. There's the, for the children that are in that sort of toddler stage where they might be already a little bit worried about strangers, like maybe they're a little clingy in that phase. Like, what can we do to help make sure that we signal that it's okay to talk to other people? Can we wave to them? Can we explain that, okay, right now we can't talk to them, but I'm going to wave. I'm going to make some sidewalk chalk art outside that other people can play games in my neighborhood. I can put up, pictures in the window. And then also thinking about those relationships that children do have, right? Can we draw a picture and send it to a friend? Can we FaceTime? Can we have conversations with grandma and neighbor and schoolmate? All of these different things, I think, really putting the emphasis on continuing to build and maintain relationships that are so important for all of us is sort of the best thing that we can do in this time.
So you mentioned just a little bit about the re-entering in society piece.
Yeah.
Do you know, or do you have anything from previous pandemics, or is this kind of a new novel situation, or any thoughts that you can share with maybe a tactic or two?
Yeah. It's sort of in my consciousness of like, this is a thing that we're going to have to do, but I think no one really knows, and how we re-enter looks different in different places and for different people. I think the thing that I'm trying to keep in mind, is that we have many of us, all of us have gone through this adjustment period where we've adjusted to being at home and we've created a new routine. And children are probably used to this new routine. And so it's not, first of all, there's going to be this sort of period where we're wearing masks and we're in different places. And then it's going to be this sort of phased reentry, right? But we're not going to immediately fall back into what it was like before. And even going outside more often, going to class, whenever that looks like, is going to be different. And that's going to be an adjustment. And I think it perhaps may surprise all of us who are longing for that, that we then have to be patient with ourselves and with children as they readjust, and we'll figure it out. But there is going to be that adjustment period where we're thinking about, okay, like it's a new transition. It's a new thing. We have to learn new schedules and new routines. We have to go through all of that again. It's sort of the reverse process.
Oh, yay, can't wait.
Yeah, I know. Add that to the list.
So what I'm hearing is definitely give, as adults, as caretakers, really give yourself grace and really slowly re-enter it. Don't just drop them off at preschool or whatever
No.
it looks like and say, see ya.
Yeah, no, have those conversations, talk about it, I find myself right now, we're getting so used to not approaching people. So like, how are we going to figure out how to, like, when it's safe to be in such close contact again, like how do we reframe that? I think it'll be easier to slip back into that since that's so much more natural for us as humans. But there is going to be that, like, okay, for adults, children, everyone.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So, what are, I guess, some of the things that caregivers and parents and even early childhood educators, or really anyone who works with young children, can do currently right now to engage children's minds or support their continued cognitive growth?
Yeah. And, again, here, like we say all the time in education, early education, every moment is a learning opportunity. So there are moments all the time to learn. Learning does not just happen in a classroom, it doesn't happen with fancy toys. So there are moments everywhere for children to learn. For example, right now there's a house up the street from me, and they're building a new house next door, and there's an excavator, or as one of my young friends likes to say, a digger up there. And I've seen multiple families walk by, or like that's the end of their walk, and they talk about, they watch what's happening, and then you can imagine building on that sort of organic thing that's happening in the neighborhood. You could read a book about it, right? You could draw a picture about it. You can talk about it. There's all of those things. But again, as we were talking about earlier, and I think this is kind of a theme, right? Adults need to make sure that they're giving themselves grace in this situation too. I think there can be a lot of pressure to, recreate a school setting or provide all of this educational content. And adults also have their own jobs. Many of us are not teachers. You can't recreate this educational environment that kids are in, and that's okay. It's just not realistic that you're going to make that happen. So everyone, all parents, needs to give themselves some grace and a break, and just think about like we were talking about earlier, those like the social connections right now, the relationships. We can learn through making dinner together, pulling weeds together. You got to reorganize the bookshelf. Like, let's do that together. And also taking breaks too. That's important.
Your book behind you looks pretty good. So.
Oh yeah. But maybe I should rearrange it. Like maybe we can. Maybe it needs to be by color. That's a trend that I see. Versus by category. And of course too, like paying attention to adults' own bodies and cues. How are we doing? I'm kind of sitting over like that. I spend a lot of time like this these days. I don't know about you. Are we picking our phone up for the first thing? Are we rolling out of bed and picking our phone up? Are we working late? Are we feeling pressure about being productive? And are the little ones in our lives watching us, and what are they learning from us as they're watching us too? So, some self-care is really super important in this time as well. So it's kind of there's a lot. I have so much for you that I just keep kind of, talking in your direction.
Your institute has a ton of different modules and things like that. So for anyone listening, please go out and check on their website. Do you have the website offhand that they can go visit?
Oh yeah. It is. I'm gonna pull it up just to make sure that I say this right. But it is modules. So modules.ilabs.uw.edu. And that will get you to all of our free training modules. And we've been working for almost 2 years now on a relaunch, which we're really excited about. That's coming up soon. We're going to have a ton of new resources that we haven't had available yet, and a whole new look. And we're really excited about that. So I'll be sure to keep you updated about that too.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I really do appreciate also you said that learning can happen anywhere, and even if it's cooking and you just throw in I'm trying to think of the science term, sorry, it's been a while, but units of measurement, and just describing what you're seeing and what you're doing is really helping to support children's acquisition of language, and all down the list, which I'm sure you know, but
Yeah. I mean, cooking is such a fun example because, I mean, depending on the age of the child, right, you can do, there's so much great like prediction that you can do, you know, or observation, like what does the food look like now? What do we think it's going to look like when we put it in the oven? You know, when you're cutting up vegetables, like what are the different shapes you can make, comparisons, units of measure, like you said. And then we just have so many memories and feelings associated with foods too. Like, what do we like? What does it make us think of? What does this smell like to you? You can just sort of go on and on with cooking in particular.
do you have any activity so like my go-to is always cooking because I love food. Um,
Yeah.
do you have any activities that people don't normally think of or associate,
Mm.
learning with?
Yeah. I mean, it is really everywhere and all opportunity there, you know, so many opportunities. I really like to let's see what are some. I mean, we talked a little bit about cleaning earlier, right? You know, there's all sorts of organizing that you can do with that. I spent a lot of my childhood outside. You know, my parents really loved gardening and getting, you know, so I spent a ton of time weeding and putting stuff in wheelbarrows. And as a result, I know a lot of plant names that I wouldn't have, you know, I sort of just absorbed all these plant names. And so when I'm on walks, I'm like, oh, that's a that, and that's a that. Walking is another one. There's so many opportunities. There's just so much that's going on around us that if we spend that time, you don't even have to go far, right? You can go around the block. You can, you know, look for the ants, or you know, look at the different trash cans if that's what's around. You know, like all the trash cans look the same? You know, what's on the bus stop? There's so many different things that if you're thinking about, if you go on this sort of like a nature walk or a city walk, to think about what are the smells, what are the sights, what am I seeing, what am I hearing. And right now is a good time to see what are you hearing, because the traffic is a lot quieter. So I've been hearing a lot of birds, all sorts of stuff, music, smelling a lot of good foods when I walk around. I've been noticing that.
Perfect. All right. So I'm thinking. So we have a couple of our children in our center, who's either pre-verbal or nonverbal.
Yeah.
And once again, drawing it back to the pandemic at hand, which I'm sure people in the future, in 10, 15 years, whenever the next global one happens, knock on wood, I'm thinking about what possible changes in behavior should we be watching for, specifically in pre-verbal and nonverbal children, and what might that indicate?
Yeah. So every child is different, right? But stress can show up in a lot of different ways. And even for children who might, you know, are verbal, talking about stress or talking about what they're experiencing can be hard, because they might not really have the language, or they might not really understand. And so when we're thinking about stress and we're thinking about trauma, there's sort of like a whole collection of different things that we can think about. So being really irritable, maybe being angry, maybe not eating, maybe being really tired, maybe being clingy, maybe they're having a hard time concentrating. For a little bit older kids, you can see trauma show up in being really, really perfectionistic. That's something that we don't really think about all the time, and sometimes can easily get missed. Kids are trying to do everything really, really perfectly by the book, or being overly self-reliant. Maybe they're being overly quiet. Maybe they're being really loud. And so this is where I think parents are going to know, adults are going to know their children best, and paying attention to those behaviors. And there's also all of us right now, we're going to have good days. We're going to have days where we're feeling moody, and kids are just the same. So there might be a day, maybe it's just they're really moody. But if you're seeing a behavior over and over and over again for a couple days, then I would say definitely, you know, or if you see like a regression, if a child is potty trained and they go back, that's something to, talk to support teams in your life, right? A pediatrician, whoever is part of that sort of care and support team, talk about, I'm noticing this behavior, what could be going on, and talk more about it. Yeah.
So we're very quick because, most adults are verbal, to express it. But are there nonverbal ways that we can support brain health for children during this time?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's really important. I mean, I keep coming back to relationships, and so much of our relationships are, we express love and care through touch. So I think that's really important. So, hugging and snuggling and being close. I think that is a really good way to help communicate safety in this moment, and care in this moment, which I think is a go-to for so many parents too. Like, I don't think there's any parent that's like, oh, that's a new thing. Yeah, surprising updates here. But there is, there's some research. I sort of went to touch because there's some research at our institute that even from a really young age, really young infants already have a really complex sort of touch system in their brain. They're already able to understand touch really easily. It's something that they recognize, and they're also able to see and recognize when someone else is being touched. So we did this study where we used a brain imaging tool called magnetoencephalography, so we can see like what's going on in kids' brains on a second by second basis. What's that?
I won't try to repeat that.
Oh yeah, I know, it's a big word. MEG. It's a tool to help us see inside the brain. And what we saw is that kids' brains not only responded when their own hand was being touched, but they responded in sort of a very similar way when they saw somebody else's hands being touched. So those same areas of their brain lit up. And it's really early, but for us, it makes us think about sort of the early roots of empathy and connection and understanding. I have a hand, you have a hand, my hand is like your hand. I can see what that might feel like or be like. So touch is this very powerful way of connecting and communicating. So there's that. But
the touch piece. So
yeah,
watching it via video, or was there somebody in the same room? Because I'm also thinking about if we are in a period of physically distancing, do you have that same effect if there's a glass in between? And I've seen the photos of people touching in between glasses. Yeah.
It was a video. So they watched a video of somebody else's hand being touched. But I think, that's that makes me wonder. I haven't thought about that. There are, hormones that are released when we touch each other. But I wonder if the same is true across glass. I don't know. But it seems as though we have that sort of that impulse, regardless of whether or not we can actually touch, to sort of like reach out, and be together. And I think there's at least some semblance of that. I think other things too, sort of a lot of this is sort of physical things that I'm going to. I think moving our bodies is really important. Going outside, getting the wiggles out. Spending some time outside, if it's inside or outside, getting the wiggles out, just like being in our bodies. I think that is really helpful, particularly when we're spending so much time sort of in this virtual world. And then I was thinking too about music and moving and dancing can be really fun. And there's other research from our institute that shows that when kids have experiences of doing something exactly in sync with somebody else. So in this case, the researcher actually built this swing set, and they had children come into the lab. They were preschool age children, and they either swung on the swing set exactly in unison or exactly out of unison. And then this researcher had the children do all of these tasks where they had to connect and collaborate. And the kids that swung exactly in unison were better and had more creative ways to connect and collaborate when they had this experience of doing something exactly together. And we see children do this on the swing set all the time. Like, we like to do things together, and dancing together is a really great way to sort of connect and have this shared experience. And you can kind of do that. It's great to do it in person, but you can also like have a dance party with grandma or a friend, you know, and you can do that, like listen to the same music and have that shared experience.
Perfect. That's so powerful. That's beautiful. Just in So we focus a lot about the children, but I kind of want to flip it back to us.
Yeah.
We know that children's brains are remarkably, that's always a word that trips me up, resilient and really primed for learning, even these less than ideal circumstances. So my thoughts are, or my question is, are there any lessons that to be learned from young people about how we as adults might cope with and adapt to these uncertain situations?
Yeah. One of the things that I go to is, you know, one of the things that's so amazing about children's brains is how creative they are, right? Like, we say this all the time. Children are so creative. And there's been some really interesting studies that show children in many situations are actually better at coming up with new and different solutions to problems than adults are. So, like, for example, there's a really classic psychology test that's called the creative uses test. And so we give this to adults, you can kind of give this to children. You might take an object like this is a pen, and then give the person an amount of time to say, think about all of the different things that this pen could be that's not a pen. And children are really good at this. And that's in part because they haven't spent their entire adult lives using a pen to write, right? You know, and as adults, we have more experience in the world. We've spent more times in our bodies and in our minds and learning from the world. And so in some ways, while we learn about more things, our creativity, our ability to think about, like, well, what else could this pen be, narrows a little bit, unless we practice it. So we can practice as adults. But children, they're like, well, it could be an airplane, or it could be a spoon, or it could be, who knows, so many different things. They just don't have all those like restrictions that we put on our adult minds and that we've learned. And so I think, and that also makes children adaptable and flexible. Children like routines, but once there's a new routine, they can adapt to those. So I think that creativity that children have and that willingness to engage and think about, you know, what else could this pen be, is so useful for us as adults when we are thinking about, you know, what do our societies look like? What could they look like? We're used to systems that have been in place for a really long time, and we're seeing right now that those systems don't work and haven't worked for a long time. And what else could they look like? And like I said, as adults, creativity is, I think sometimes it gets sort of categorized as something that you either have or you don't have. But all of us are creative, right? You know, like, oh, I could never draw. Like, you talk to an artist, right? I could never do that. You're so creative. Well, that artist has spent their entire life drawing and practicing their craft, and they've practiced that creativity, right? So as adults, we can also practice our creativity, practice making something or dreaming something. And in this case, I think we can really follow children's lead. I love playing along, letting children lead in imaginative play, right? Because they take us to all of these amazing worlds and places. And if we follow their lead, it can help kind of loosen us up a little bit sometimes.
Perfect. So what I'm hearing is tomorrow when I go into work, I'm going to tell my boss, I need to be more childlike and I'm going to go take a nap. I think that's going to go over real well. But no, thank you.
Yeah.
Out of the box thinking, being more creative, and really asking the question, what could this look like is my takeaway.
Yeah.
What you just said. So I do appreciate that. And I actually appreciate you saying that a lot of our systems haven't been working for a while and for a long time. So I kind of actually want to shift gears while we're here and we have time.
Do it.
To really think about some of the passionate protests that's happening in our country right now and the effects that it might be having on the families. So my mind goes to the University of Washington. You all broke ground on new research a couple years ago, and it really suggested that preschool-age children can learn bias even through nonverbal signals displayed by adults. That could be anything from a condescending look to a the tone in your voice to et cetera, right? I go down the list. And really that resonates with me because I think back to the murder of Michael Brown, not just because we have the same name, in 2014. And his murderer, Darren Wilson, made the remarks about his body, his presentation, his field, and it really resonates with me because I'm Black, I have the same name, I have dreads, I played college football, so I have a bigger build. But Darren remarks was saying that he called Michael like aggressive looking, demon-like, appeared as a hawk. So my question to you, for someone who specializes in neuroscience, can you describe what's going on in children's brains when they're receiving these negative messages or even just a brief exposure to biased nonverbal signals?
Yeah. So our brains are built to take in information. We're taking in like so much information all the time. And so our brains have to kind of take all that information and sort it and synthesize it and categorize it. And we kind of put it in information buckets. That just helps us get through our day. We have so much information coming in at us all the time. So like, for example, your clothes that you're wearing right now, like what do they feel like on your body? Like mine are soft, but a minute ago I wasn't thinking about that because we have like so much information all the time. Our brain's like, you don't have to think about that. I'm paying attention to the words that are coming out of your mouth, not what your clothes feel like at this moment.
I was like, oh, thank you. You noticed. So our brains are like taking in all this information, we're categorizing, and then that is going to result in us doing sort of patterned behaviors. Like we got inputs, we're going to behave in a certain way, and this helps us, and this is how we learn, it helps us get through our day. But the reality is that we live in a society that places a higher value on white lives, white bodies, white voices, and a lower value on Black bodies, Black voices, and as you were mentioning, not only a lower value, but demonizes. And we see it over again, in the media that we consume. It's everywhere and it is pervasive, and all of us in this society are stewing in this all the time, right? So as a white person in a white body, right, I get those messages about the value of my body and how I behave in the society. So my brain is taking that information in and then is going to replicate patterns of behavior for me as I go through the world and what we've seen. And so and this is where I'm sort of slowly getting to here is biased behaviors and racist behaviors, right? So if adults, we spend all this time getting all of this information from the media, from society, from everyone that we interact with, that Black bodies, Black people are dangerous. That's a message that a lot of white people get, most white people get, we see all the time in the media.
our brains start to create these little patterns of behavior, right? Like we might cross the street. We see like a white person might cross the street. We see a black person. We might, and children are watching us do all of these things and absorbing and doing them too, right? Like where do we lock our car doors? We as white people. How are our mannerisms? What all of these different things sort of get into the groundwater of our existence, of our society that we're in. And so I think it's really important, and that is just, and I'm thinking sort of, as a neuroscientist, that's like getting inputs, all the inputs that we get. How are we going to manage those? How are we going to think about those? And it's really important to interrupt that thinking by, as much as possible, bringing that to the center of our attention. Just like I thought about, like, what do my clothes feel like? What are the messages that I'm getting all the time, and how am I interacting in the world? And really thinking about that. There's been a lot, I've seen a lot, and I think it's really important to talk to children about race, have conversations about race. But equally as important is thinking about what we do, right? How we show up. What are we doing? Children are watching us. We are social creatures, and we are so paying attention to every little interaction. And again, that goes back to neuroscience, and it goes back to our survival. Little people are looking to adults to see who is safe, who to trust, and following their lead on that.
Perfect. Thank you. I know that question was negative, but I want to ask kind of a positive side to that, especially as you being a woman X in a science field, which is rare. What positive messages can you share with us that you received that you said, oh, actually, I can go into science, let alone neuroscience?
Right. Yeah. I think I appreciate you bringing that up, because I think that that's so important, right? Is thinking about what are the positive, like what are all the different positive things that are out in the world, because while there is so many, and particularly right now, so many images that are negative and violent, there's so much positivity, or so many positive examples in the world too. And so for me, I really relied on, there are fewer women in science, and for me, I really relied on the women that had gone before me. And so I did my PhD with a woman who was the leader of that lab. We call them a principal investigator. She was like the head scientist. And that was really important for me. And I worked in labs before I went to graduate school, and had women that ran those labs, and people would kind of joke in our graduate school lab that there were so many other women in the lab, and we were like, yeah, because there's a woman who's the principal investigator, and she's helped create this sort of safe space for us, and she understands. And so I know that it is very, like, representation matters, right? And it's so important to be able to see, even if there's not many, see a few people that you can identify with in fields that you might be interested in.
I'm glad you said representation matters, because I was trying to coax that out of you. Well done.
We got there eventually. Yeah.
Exactly. Thank you. I just kind of have one final question. So I'm thinking back to my family, and growing up, we experienced homelessness as well as racism. And we know that both, but I really want to focus right now on racism, can have a direct effect on children's outcomes, on children's development, as well as it just doesn't have to be direct exposure to these racial discriminations. The experiences of my family members, they had an indirect effect as well as just by living in a neighborhood where racist incidents were common. really kind of affected the physical health, my social emotional, my cognitive development. And I'm sure that's not just one siloed case in me, even though that would be a nice case study. But I'm really thinking about kind of the trauma children who are exposed to, like the murders of Black bodies, such as George Floyd, Trayvon Martin, Breonna Taylor, and unfortunately so many more. Is there any insight on what adults working with children or who have children can do to mitigate the effects of this?
Yeah, I mean, we were talking a little bit earlier about, some of those signs of trauma, and that they come up in so many different ways. And I think, as you said, it's so important to recognize the pain and fear for what it is, trauma, right? And to work actively to create safe places that are both physically safe, and emotionally safe for children to really talk about their feelings, because there's a lot going on, and creating a space to talk about what's going on, because it is scary and it is traumatic, right? I think particularly, we were talking about grace earlier, and I think here's another spot, particularly for Black adults. I think this is traumatic, and there's no need to be perfect for children or to try and shield everything that is going on, all the feelings from children. I think one of the most powerful things that anyone can do for children is to model talking about feelings in an age-appropriate way, and to share what you're feeling. Because children, we've done studies, many people have done studies, children are exquisitely sensitive to the emotions of adults, even when those emotions aren't directly directed at them. Like, they can understand what's going on in the room. They understand when two adults are talking to each other. There's a lot of emotions right now. And talking about those, I think, is really powerful. So you can model talking about how you're feeling, and then leave space for children to talk about how they're feeling too. I think too, we were talking a little bit earlier about representation, and to your point, there are so many images right now, and always going around, of police brutality and violence, but equally important is sharing all of the joy and brilliance and strength and art and all of and scholarship and all of the positive things that are happening in the Black community. And in the world, right? And really focusing on that. And I think for children, because when things are so scary, right, for all of us, we need to think about, like, well, where is the hope, and where is the opportunity for me to get engaged and not feel powerless? And then also another area of study that we talk a lot about at iLabs is thinking about self-identity, right? So how do I identify? And do I have high self-esteem? And how do I feel? And you have to really actively work hard to help create that in, again, in a society where the overwhelming media is not sending that message. So really thinking about building that self-esteem and positive self-identity too. I think it's another thing that can be really, really helpful for thinking about, like, building and supporting in this time.
Thank you. This has been really amazing, and I couldn't thank you enough for joining us and being a part of this new segment. Really just trying to help and ask different expertise, and just trying to share the love that's gone around. So I appreciate that. I guess final thoughts is there any research or scholarship you're working on that you'd like to share, or any shout outs, any special requests? Can't do much.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me. This has been really great, and I've really enjoyed having this conversation today. And I really appreciate your work and Hilltop's work too. So that has been really, really great. I mentioned it earlier, but our outreach team is going to relaunch our website soon with a bunch of new resources. I have some preview of some resources I can send you. One personal project I'm working on right now is a project called Finding Math. And we're at a bunch of different science or children's museums right now, sort of virtually at the moment. But we have an Instagram. It's at finding_math. And every couple days we post activities to help parents and families find math in the everyday. So that's been one of the things I've been thinking about. And I wanted to think about how, so often math is numbers. We think a lot about numbers and counting, but we try and offer all sorts of different activities, like going on a nature walk and looking at the flowers that might be out right now and like, what are their different shapes? That's a great way to think about math. How can we use math and numbers to describe our feelings when that can be hard for adults right now? Like, am I feeling a 5 happy or like a 1 sad? So we try and engage in a bunch of different ways. So if folks are interested in that, you can give us a follow. That's something I've been working on lately.
Perfect. Thank you so much once again. And I look forward to seeing and following all of the different wonderful things that you're doing.
Great. Wonderful. Same.